Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is a show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week, and today, on the 11th of February 2019, we are starting the final episode in the Philip Hinchcliffe Presents range. The fourth story, third release, the Helm of Awe, once again adapted for audio by Mark Platt. And of course written mainly by Philip Hinchcliffe. The Helm of Awe is interesting as it is the only story to actually take place in what was the then present day. This is very much a story that could have easily just been slotted in season 14 or even perhaps season 15. Interestingly enough, it creates we're in Scotland, on an island off the coast of Scotland, with sort of famous for Viking heritage, which is kind of important for a lot of the story, is just the fact that, there's Viking heritage in this area. We actually don't get interested to what the Helm of Awe is, but basically it's the Doctor and Leela essentially receive a summons from the Brigadier and unit from the space-time telegraph that it's like, hey, I need help, so come and help me, Doctor, because, that's what you do. And so, in coming to help, the Doctor and Leela they find this, they accidentally go off course to this island where a lot of weird stuff is going on. There's something really deeper. It's something very mythical. This is a story very much connected, I think, to sort of Norse mythology. Like, the Vikings play a big part here. So you have, just this sense that everything is everything it isn't because of, sort of Vikings, but there's just this sense of there are Vikings happening. Everyone in this village, in this sort of island, is descended from Vikings, and being descended from Vikings, it's just a lot of sort of odd people doing odd things. Like, you have all just the weird people living in their town, not really having a they don't entirely show that they are completely sane. They're people living in a town where they realize, people realize it's quite an odd town. It's like, yes, people live here, but no one's going to really complain at them. It's just like, hey, they all exist. There's this, like, tradition of the boys versus girls of the village sort of having a fun race around the island in a canoe, that Leela gets involved in, and it's just this implication that there's something slightly darker going on here. This isn't just your standard, the town happens to be, to have been, totally cut off. It's just, it's weird. It's a weird town with weird people living in it, and that just sort of brings in this sense of dread, that everyone sort of knows everyone else, and, people have built themselves a sense of community. One of the biggest problems here is that, for part one, not too much actually gets established. Like, the biggest intrigue is, someone acting slightly out of character, and the Aurora Borealis just doesn't look right according to the Doctor. It looks too regular and patterned, which is one of those things where it's like, well, it could be, something sinister and dark, and it could be something evil. That doesn't necessarily mean it is. It could just be, just an odd occurrence that no one can explain. There's no necessarily an explanation for. It's just a weird thing that's happened in this area for some reason. There's also just, it doesn't. One of the odd things, also, is just there are points that sort of take you out of the action. Like, Leela gives a war cry, and because Louise Jameson is aged, she can no longer really scream like she would. it just sounds awkward. Um, Anyway, it's just that awkwardness that sort of, just sort of almost jolts you right out of the story. The episode's still good. You still have this good intrigue with these characters, like, oh, well, who they are, why some of them don't leave the island. What is this big, grand tradition of theirs? Like, why? Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking, we're talking some interesting stuff. So, you have the intrigue there. You just don't have the you just don't necessarily have all of the explanations for like what the intrigue is leading to and how the intrigue will finish the story. Where we're going from here with said intrigue and said storytelling. So overall, I'm going to give The Helm of Awe Part 1 an 8 out of 10. Alright, it is the 12th of February 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 2 of The Helm of Awe, and Part 2 of The Helm of Awe is a great continuation of the story begun in the first episode. I'd almost even argue that it's better in almost every way to the first episode, just because we actually get sort of an interesting sort of tonal shift here, where we aren't quite doing a gothic horror story set with like a Vikingish backdrop. We're doing almost a harder science fiction story. Kind of like, well, the marathon hasn't covered this story yet, but the Stones of Blood. There's most definitely alien influence, and it's very more a science fiction-y alien influence, and not a alien influence from a, like sort of that gothic brain of Morbius, talons of Weng Chiang type thing, if that makes sense. Like tonally, just the story in general feels more like it's a, it feels more like it's for heralded towards the science fiction crowd, and less of the more gothic Hinchcliffe fan crowd, and that's actually not a bad thing. Philip Hinchcliffe does a good job at writing something in this style. He does a very good job sort of knowing that this is his core style. If he's doing this core style, he kind of has to stick with it, and he can't really be like, oh no, I'm going to just switch back and forth, or else he'll create a tonal whiplash. He also does this really good job of sort of getting the Helm of Awe to feel like something's off. Like, that's intentional. It's not like the actors are off, but something's just off with this village area. It's like, we have the village as a, basically as a good old-fashioned, just sort of English village, but it's got the more interesting sort of idea that instead of that instead of that instead of writing a story where everything is wrong, you just sort of have this off sense, like everyone's good together. Like the biggest conflict at the early part of this second episode is the big race. Leela accidentally makes them lose the big race because she thinks she drowns, but it turns out she may be having some psychic projections, which is the one thing I don't really buy. But there's also just this great sense of characters deceiving one another. Like the doctor has a guy working with this professor, gets tricked and locked in a cellar, and then he lies to Leela saying, "Oh, I didn't see him." And you have just this big plot line with this festival, and there are people, trying to enjoy the festival and live their lives like they would with a festival like this. And it's bits like this that I really, really enjoy, because it does a good job of portraying the life of these people. Not only the life, but sort of like it portrays the village life It also feels like something's wrong. It's also just the mythology of the area is really solid. Like, we get the first instance of the Helm of Awe. You have these people; they're very proud of their Norse heritage. The Norse heritage is, very, very strong. Very much is alive with. It's a living sort of heritage. It's one that everybody sort of has to participate in. Um, because it's just a thing. That's just something that happens. That we participate in. They participate in the heritage, and they create um, you know and they create a really solid sense um, of just of community. But there's also just this darkness around them, which I really do enjoy. Hinchcliffe has done a good job of just creating the world, and a lot of this episode seems to be world building and building up to the idea that the Helm is an alien thing that almost makes people kind of go crazy, like they're gonna burn people at the stake, which is something that rational people shouldn't do. They realize it's like there's this just realization that not everything is right, that something is causing all of these problems. It's all a lot of fear, and tactics of creating fear and using fear to your advantage. So I'm going to give the Helm of Awe Part 2 a 9 out of 10. It is the 14th of February. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone, 2019. I do apologize that I missed a day, but sadly that couldn't be helped. I got very, very busy. But the Helm of Awe Part 3 is perhaps the best episode yet. It's an episode where we actually take a trip in time. The Doctor and Leela go back in time, start to figure out what the Helm is and what it means and what the aliens actually want. They seem to be a very, very sort of psychic race, sort of feeding off these strong emotions that people have. And again, whip people into the frenzy, which perhaps is a little derivative of the Devil's Armada, but, it's such a good idea, and, Tom Baker and Louise Jameson are obviously having a lot of fun with it, that I can't really blame it for being bad, because it isn't bad. It's a good story and a good premise for a Doctor Who script. And if you have a good premise for a Doctor Who script, then why not use it? The biggest, most interesting parts of the plot is that, this one, we go back to during World War II and see one of our characters as a young kid, his father, and we see his father going completely insane, and we actually get some really heartfelt depth, like the Doctor and Leela. Again, they're gonna be shot at the end of this. They are essentially going to be killed because people think they're German Nazi spies. Something that, very much makes sense for the time, because, if it was World War II, that was a fear. The Helm of Awe Part 3 really takes advantage of the fact that we are in this, different sort of time period, and it makes advantage of the fact that this is still a Doctor Who story. A lot of it is also just the plot thickening overall, mainly so we can, till we can get a, good conclusion, and, having a plot that, continues to twist and turn really helps here. Like, Hinchcliffe and Platt have done a really good job, of just making everything completely engaging, giving our characters enough depth and interest to really be, solid characters, not just be sort of caricatures, which sometimes becomes a problem with things like Doctor Who, because it's having good characters with good stories to tell that really is what makes Doctor Who good overall. Like, you need to have a good solid starter, else you're not gonna succeed when you tell a story. And the Helm of Awe Part 3 is a great way of telling a story. Also, I think Louise Jameson's sort of reactions here are really, really good. Jameson, just as an actress, has always been this solid actress, and just a really solid performer, and really, really good at, giving the show her all, and sort of just showing, what she can do. She has, these great moments with the Doctor, and with the Doctor, she sort of really has grown. In the story on her own, she goes through this emotional journey of thinking the Doctor's dead, finding him again, traveling back in time, trying to understand what everything is, and really it's all building up to this conclusion what's going to be in part 4, something that I think just is done really, really well. Also, just, the acting from the guest cast is really good. There are no real big names in this one, but it's a solid cast of sort of character actors, people who, take their craft seriously, know what they're doing, and genuinely have a good time with the script that they're given. And it helps that it's a really good script. There's plenty of jokes. Again, there isn't enough, it's not as gothic horror, it's more mythologically focused. It almost feels like this could have been an opener for a season 15, if we had a different direction, because I know Hinchcliffe wanted to go into a different direction for season 15 if he had stayed on Who. It would have gone away from the gothic stuff and more into the more of an adventure type story. And this sort of feels very adventurous. And it feels very much like something that could be produced at the time, in a very, very good way. It's well written, well paced, well acted, and just sort of gives the part 3. It's a really good example of how to do a part 3 well. So I'm going to give The Helm of Awe Part 3 a 10 out of 10. It is the 15th of February 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 4 of The Helm of Awe. Now, Part 4 of The Helm of Awe is definitely a step down from Part 3, mainly because a lot of the depth and motivation of our villain just doesn't sort of work. Like, the idea is that he's been sort of possessing this one family through a star birthmark, which got some mentions, but there wasn't nearly as much importance put on it as it probably should have. And it's not set up like it's supposed to be a twist. It's supposed to be like in actuality, it's supposed to be just an aspect of the story in general. Like, part of the plot line is that the daughter, who I can't remember the name of, develops this birthmark and is taken over for the climax. As sort of the village almost goes insane and with like this rage of, we need to kill the doctor because I think the idea is he's disrespecting our religion, is how they rationalize it, but the whole point is that it's not actually a rational thing. The alien's not making them do rational things. The awe in the Helm of Awe is more of like an awe, fearful awe, like lashing out in awe. It's a very different definition of awe as we usually would, and I think that's actually rather interesting that Hinchcliffe uses that, context for the title. It's he's sort of, almost subverting expectations. Like, the helm itself is an artifact that's creating all the problems, and it's something that is almost to be feared in awe, which is, just sort of an older context of the word awe. It doesn't, it's not as modern as other contexts have been for this word. It's also very much just a story of how things, we're examining sort of how things have changed. Like, the island at the end of the story is changed almost forever. There's a volcano that has popped up now. Things are going to be noticed because UNIT was called in. Even if, the Brigadier is off in Geneva pretty much, because, that's just sort of a standard thing for this era, and sadly, the passing of Nicholas Courtney, which would be interesting to see maybe if Nick Courtney had a part in this story, had he not sadly passed away before it was released 2 very short years ago. It's this nice little, there are these nice little sort of, sprinklings in of just sort of this epithet that, like, yeah, everything is, it's all a story for, we're building up the story as it goes, and we're going to have some fun with, we're not only going to have some fun with it, but we're going to really, try to show, here's what we're doing, here's this big conclusion, and it's really, really enjoyable. Like, Louise Jameson as Leela, as usual, is a great fun here. She, gets to really partake in the final, sort of battle with these aliens, and it's a nice conclusion to a 4-part story. Don't get me wrong, it's a bit slow in places. It feels like it's going on forever, and it doesn't land quite as well as it should. It's still a really solid episode. It has these issues of just these minor sort of quibbles of just not being perfect at working things out and finding, right, this is where we're ending the story. This is how the story ends. This is really what's been going on. Here's our explanation for the aliens, and here's our explanation for the plot. Like, this is, this was what we were building to a conclusion. Here's that conclusion we have built to, and let's move on. Perhaps, it's perhaps just an interesting sort of way the episode goes about doing things, and not deciding to have that built-in conclusion. What's really nice is there's a lot of rich mythology here, a lot of sort of Viking culture, sort of built in, almost as if this was meant to be a more educational script, and some of that got written out by Platt. Because I really like quite a lot of the education stuff in this episode and in the previous ones. But here you have, this sort of really good example of Viking warfare, because that's sort of what the Helm influences our characters to sort of partake in, that they partake in a sort of Viking style war. They they have they attack each other, and they deal with the consequences of that, and that's an interesting side to the story. Again, Tom Baker is really good. He does the really good crafty doctor persona here. Like, he talks his way out of the cliffhanger, but he also has some really touching emotional moments when he has to admit, I did go into the past and sort of was there when your grandfather committed suicide for no reason because he couldn't kill me and Leela. It's obviously much more touching than I'm making it out to be. But it's a very touching scene, and something that Tom Baker does very, very well is, just sort of play off I'm trying to make things right. He sort of gets this almost bit of tired of seeing things go wrong sort of portrayal here, which I think is, an interesting little aspect to the character that doesn't quite get explored as much as perhaps it should. But just in general, it's Tom Baker Baker does a great job just as the Doctor. Leela's great as Louise Jameson's great as Leela, and oddly enough, just the part 4 of the Helm of Awe is a genuinely good, satisfactory conclusion to the story. Again, it's been something that goes to make great is that this entire range of what's essentially 4 stories has been really, really solid. So overall, I'm going to give the Helm of Awe Part 4 an 8 out of 10. And we averaged the 4 episodes of the Helm of Awe to give the Helm of Awe a final score of 8.75 out of 10. Thank everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And with that, we bring us to our end of the discussions about the Philip Hinchcliffe Presents range. So join me next time when we begin a look at this, the next chronological sort of season block, Series 3 of the 4th Doctor Adventures with the King of SONTAR.